Trump just declared a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. Every major outlet is running the same story. This is about Iran, this is about oil, this is about military pressure on a rogue regime. That framing is not wrong, it is catastrophically incomplete. Because between 80 and 90% of the ships that blockade is designed to stop are not Iranian ships. They are Chinese ships. Ships carrying Iranian oil, purchased in yuan, settled completely outside the dollar system, invisible to SWIFT, untouchable by US sanctions. Trump said Iran. What he actually meant was China, and China knows it. I'm your host at Recession Warnings. Silver is trading at $73.57 per ounce as I record this. Gold sits at $4,912. Both are lower this morning. Silver's off $2.20. Gold is down $35.20. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why that sell-off is not a warning sign. It is a buying signal. Because what is being decided in that strait right now is not about oil flows. It is about which currency the world uses to buy oil for the next 50 years. And the answer to that question will reprice silver more dramatically than anything that has happened in the last decade. Before I walk you through the full picture, let me be direct about something. The analysis I'm about to give you is not mainstream. You will not hear this on financial television. You will not read it in the major financial press. The major outlets are covering the military angle because military images generate clicks. They are not covering the monetary architecture angle because that requires explaining something most financial journalists have never been trained to understand. At Recession Warnings, this is exactly what we do. We follow the structural logic, not the headline. And right now, the structural logic is pointing somewhere the headlines are completely ignoring. Here is what Trump actually said and why the two statements together tell a completely different story than either one alone. Statement 1, the United States Navy will blockade all vessels entering or exiting the Strait of Hormuz. Any vessel paying tribute to Iran will not be permitted passage. Statement 2, let China send its ships to us. Send them to Venezuela. We have plenty of oil. We will sell it cheaper. Now, here is the number that mainstream coverage buried. Between 80 and 90% of Iran's oil exports flow directly to China. Almost every vessel that Statement 1 is designed to stop is a vessel heading to a Chinese port. Trump publicly named Iran, but what he is actually severing is China's most important non-dollar energy pipeline. This is not a coincidence. This is the entire point. China has been buying Iranian oil in yuan, no SWIFT involvement, no US banking system exposure, no ability for Washington to freeze the transaction, sanction the counterparty, or shut off the tap. Settlement happens in Chinese currency, sometimes with crypto or gold intermediary settlement running through the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Iran receives payment in a form that requires zero contact with the US financial system. That arrangement has been a quiet but structurally massive act of de-dollarization operating in plain sight for years, and it has been working. Trump's blockade declaration is not military pressure on Iran. It is a demand directed at Beijing. Buy your oil from us. Use our system. Re-enter dollar dependency. Because the moment China starts purchasing American or Venezuelan oil through US channels, it re-enters SWIFT. It uses dollars. It exposes itself to the exact same lever Washington has already used against Russia, against Iran, against any nation that has defied its preferences. The ability to freeze assets, restrict access, and strangle supply at will. China understands this completely, and China is not going to voluntarily walk back into that cage. This is where the stakes become something much larger than an Iran standoff. The blockade declaration forces a binary outcome. Either it works or it doesn't. There is no diplomatic middle lane here. Either Chinese ships are stopped by the US Navy in international waters, or they pass through untouched. And each of those outcomes carries consequences that dwarf anything happening in the Iranian nuclear negotiation itself. If the US stops a Chinese merchant vessel in international waters, China does not respond with a press release. China responds by accelerating Treasury selling. China responds by deepening its naval presence in the region. China responds by strengthening the yuan payment infrastructure inside the strait itself. And critically, China responds by accelerating every de-dollarization mechanism it has been quietly constructing since 2008. The rare earth card comes back out on the table. China controls approximately 75% of global rare earth exports that the United States imports. The US imports roughly 80% of its rare earth consumption annually. That leverage does not disappear during a naval standoff. It intensifies. And the Treasury market, the 10-year yield already sitting near 4.34%, the 30-year pressing against 4.93%, would face selling pressure that makes current yields look like a warm-up act. Foreign central banks holding US bonds as reserve assets would begin asking the question they have been quietly asking for 3 years. Why are we holding these? If the reserve currency issuer is using its military to enforce financial dependency on sovereign nations, those bonds are not a safe asset. They are a political instrument, and political instruments get sold when the politics turn hostile. If the blockade fails, if Chinese ships pass through the strait and the U.S. Navy stands aside, the damage to dollar credibility is immediate and severe. Every Gulf nation watching that moment, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, draws the same conclusion. The umbrella does not hold. The protection guarantee is theater. And the intelligence coming from that region suggests those countries are already acting on that conclusion quietly. They are continuing to sell U.S. treasuries. They are buying gold. They are buying silver. They are acquiring equity stakes in gold and silver mining operations. The repositioning is not theoretical. It is active, and it is accelerating. Both outcomes, blockade success and blockade failure, have a path that leads to dollar weakness. The question is not whether the dollar weakens from here. The question is how fast. There's a trap built into being the world's reserve currency. It was identified decades ago by an economist named Robert Triffin, and every empire that has ever held reserve currency status has eventually walked straight into it. The trap works like this. To supply the world with your currency, you have to spend more than you earn. You have to run persistent trade deficits. You have to export your currency, which means importing goods, hollowing out domestic industry, accumulating debt, and watching manufacturing capacity migrate to lower-cost competitors. The Portuguese Empire ran this playbook. The Spanish did too. The Dutch. The British, whose reserve currency era ended the moment it could not enforce its claim over the Suez Canal in 1956. Every reserve currency eventually reaches the inflection point where the cost of maintaining the system exceeds the capacity to sustain it. The United States has been at that inflection point for years. What is happening at the Strait of Hormuz right now is not a cause. It is the trap closing. China read this dynamic clearly in 2008. The global financial crisis nearly collapsed a system that China had been a major creditor of. China held enormous volumes of U.S. treasuries at that point and helped stabilize the system. Then it spent the next 17 years systematically reducing that exposure, from roughly 29% of foreign-held U.S. treasuries down to approximately 7.3% today. Simultaneously, China has been accumulating gold for 17 consecutive months, as of the latest reported figures, with each successive purchase larger than the one before it. Shanghai Gold Exchange exists precisely so that yuan holders can convert currency into gold without touching a single dollar-denominated instrument. Iran's toll system in the Strait, collecting fees in yuan with gold settlement available through Shanghai, is not improvised. It is the operational end of an infrastructure that has been under construction for a decade. The Iranian parliament legalized the toll system in March of 2026. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Japan, one of the largest holders of U.S. treasuries on Earth, approximately $1 trillion in holdings, one of America's closest military and economic allies, has already used that system. Japan paid the yuan-denominated toll to ensure its ships could transit. Not a BRICS country, not a sanctions target. Japan. When Japan is paying yuan tolls to move oil through a strait it used to transit freely under American protection, the architecture of the petrodollar system is not just under pressure. It is already partially collapsed. Now let me connect this directly to silver, because silver is not a passive observer of currency wars. It is one of the primary beneficiaries when those wars reach their conclusion, and we are approaching a conclusion. Every major reserve currency transition in history has been accompanied by a surge in gold and silver prices denominated in the outgoing currency. As confidence in the reserve currency erodes, capital seeks assets that exist outside the system. Assets that cannot be sanctioned, cannot be frozen, carry no counterparty risk. Physical silver is one of those assets. Physical gold is another. And the Gulf region sovereigns who are actively selling treasuries and accumulating both metals right now understand something that retail investors in the West are only beginning to grasp. When the system resets, the assets that survive are the ones that don't depend on any nation's promise to hold their value. Silver at $73.57. Today is not expensive. It is not at a peak. It is at the precise moment where the foundational logic for owning it has never been more visible to more sophisticated capital simultaneously. The sell-off this morning, silver down $2.20, touching a session low before recovering, is not a signal that the thesis has cracked. It is what always happens at moments of geopolitical escalation. When oil spikes, risk-off selling hits everything simultaneously. WTI crude trading near $96.50 this morning is a fear signal, and fear signals produce indiscriminate selling. Traders dump gold, dump silver, raise cash, move toward perceived safety. But the key word is perceived, because the US dollar as a safe haven instrument is precisely the thing whose credibility is being tested by the blockade announcement itself. The flight to dollars in a dollar credibility crisis is temporary by definition, and when it reverses hard. Gold dropped over $100 overnight, touching $4,637 in spot trading before recovering to $4,736 by the time London opened. Silver touched $72.50 before recovering over $2. These are not random oscillations. This is the violent breathing of a market processing an event it has never encountered in modern form, a direct challenge by a nuclear-armed economic rival to the military enforcement mechanism of the petrodollar system. By the way, where are you watching this from? And are you holding physical silver right now or still on the sidelines? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. The industrial demand case for silver is entirely separate from the monetary case, and it is not weakened at all by what is happening in the Strait. Solar panel manufacturing continues to consume silver at record rates. Artificial intelligence infrastructure build-outs require silver in enormous quantities. Electric vehicle production is not slowing. Global mine supply is not expanding fast enough to meet existing demand. Those fundamentals are locked in place regardless of what happens in any geopolitical standoff. But the monetary demand case, the case for silver as a store of value outside the dollar system, as an asset in a world where the reserve currency is visibly weaponizing itself, that case just received the most dramatic public confirmation it has ever had. When you combine structurally tight industrial supply with accelerating monetary demand from the most sophisticated capital pools on the planet, you do not get a gradual repricing. You get a violent one. The analytical framework here draws on a pattern that Ray Dalio has documented across centuries of imperial transition. When a dominant superpower loses control of a critical trade route, what follows is consistent. Trust collapses. Allies begin hedging. Capital repositions away from the dominant power's instruments. The process is not instantaneous, but it is irreversible once it begins. Portugal lost control of the spice trade routes. The Dutch lost critical sea lanes to Britain. Britain's defining moment came at Suez in 1956, when it attempted to retake control of the canal from Egypt and was forced to stand down under American pressure. That moment did not immediately end the British pound's reserve status, but it confirmed what sophisticated capital had already concluded. Britain could not enforce its claims. The pound was not backed by uncontested power. The slow-motion exit from sterling accelerated. Gold denominated in pounds began its long appreciation as the currency eroded. Now substitute the Strait of Hormuz for Suez. Substitute the dollar for the pound. Substitute China for the coalition that pressured Britain in 1956. The historical parallel is not perfect, it never is, but the structural logic is identical. A power that cannot enforce its claim over a critical trade route has already begun its transition from primary to secondary status. Assets denominated in the transitioning currency, U.S. Treasury bonds, begin a long repricing lower. Assets outside the system, physical gold, physical silver, begin a long repricing higher. This is not speculation. This is the documented pattern of every major reserve currency transition in recorded financial history. And understanding that pattern is what separates the people who hold their position through days like today from the people who sell the bottom and watch the repricing happen without them. If you're watching silver drop this morning and feeling it, good. That means you're paying attention. But understand what you are actually watching. This is not the thesis breaking. This is the shakeout before the move. The people who accumulate physical metal during moments of indiscriminate fear selling are the ones who will be holding the asset when the structural repricing arrives. Not a speculative repricing that reverses when sentiment shifts. A structural one, the kind driven by forces that do not reverse because the conditions that produce them do not reverse. Now let me give you the specific framework for what to watch in the next 72 hours. Not abstract principles, concrete variables with concrete consequences. The first variable is Chinese naval positioning relative to the Strait. If China moves naval assets toward the Hormuz region, it is signaling that it will not accept the blockade passively. That signal will strengthen gold and silver as dollar alternatives immediately. Watch for any official Chinese Defense Ministry statements accompanying ship movements. Words and movements together constitute a policy declaration. The second variable is Treasury yields. The 10-year at 4.34% and the 30-year at 4.93% are already near levels that historically slow the U.S. economy. If those yields spike further, if the 10-year presses toward 4.5 or beyond, it likely means foreign holders are selling at scale. Treasury selling at scale means dedollarization is no longer just strategic positioning. It is active, urgent, and accelerating. That is the most immediately observable bullish signal for silver and gold you can track in real time. The third variable is the Shanghai Gold Exchange price relative to the London fix. When the SGE premium over London expands, it signals that Chinese institutional demand for physical gold is intensifying beyond what the paper market in the West can satisfy. A widening SGE premium right now, in this specific context, would be an extremely powerful confirmation signal that the monetary demand thesis is moving from theory to active capital flow. The fourth variable is WTI crude relative to gold. This morning, crude is near $96.50. Gold is at $4,112. If crude continues falling while gold holds or rises, it signals that the market is beginning to separate the fear of war trade from the monetary debasement trade. That separation, when it completes, historically marks the beginning of the most powerful phase of a gold and silver bull run. The fifth variable is any statement from Gulf sovereign wealth funds or central banks regarding their treasury positions. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, these are among the largest sovereign holders of dollar-denominated assets on Earth. A public statement of intent to diversify, even a carefully worded one, would be a seismic signal for precious metals. You do not need to monitor all five simultaneously, but you need to understand that each one is a thread in the same fabric. When multiple threads move in the same direction at the same time, the fabric tears. And that tearing is what reprices silver from where it sits today toward levels that would have looked impossible 18 months ago. There is one more distinction that matters more right now than at almost any point in recent history: the difference between physical silver and paper silver. Not paper silver, not silver ETFs, not silver futures contracts that can be liquidated by a margin call when volatility spikes. Physical silver, metal in hand, outside the system. Unsanctionable, unfreezable. That distinction has never mattered more than it does in a moment when the system that backs the paper is the system under direct challenge. The ETF holds a claim. The futures contract holds a promise. Physical metal holds value independent of whether any institution honors any obligation. When the architecture shifts, and the evidence reviewed today suggests the architecture is already shifting, paper claims in the old system are repriced against real assets outside it. That repricing is not guaranteed to happen on a schedule that is convenient for your portfolio, but it is increasingly difficult to construct a credible scenario in which it does not happen at all. Let me also be direct about volatility because the 1970s precedent is instructive and it is not comfortable. The transition away from Bretton Woods, last time the dollar's structural role was fundamentally renegotiated, saw gold move from $35 per ounce to $850. That sounds linear. It was not. In the middle of that historic run, gold fell 47%. 47% drawdown inside a bull market that ultimately produced a 2,300% gain. The people who sold during that 47% drawdown did not participate in what came after. The people who understood why they owned it, who could articulate the structural logic, not just the price target, held through the drawdown and captured the move. Today's $2.20 drop in silver is not a 47% drawdown. It is a single morning of fear-driven selling in response to an event whose implications the market has not yet fully processed. The algorithms sold first. The leveraged traders got washed out. The risk-off flows hit everything indiscriminately. That is always how it starts. It is never how it ends. Here is where things stand as of Monday, April 13th, 2026. Silver at $73.57, gold at $1,712. A blockade declaration in the Strait of Hormuz that is not about Iran. It is about forcing China back into dollar dependency. China's oil supply, 75 to 90% sourced from Iran, routed through a strait where yuan payment infrastructure is already legally operational, already used by Japan, already functioning outside the dollar system. A binary outcome incoming. Blockade succeeds and risks direct confrontation with a nuclear-armed economic rival, or blockade fails and dollar credibility fractures publicly and irreversibly. Gulf sovereigns actively selling treasuries and buying physical gold and silver. China reducing treasury exposure from 29% to 7.3% of foreign holdings over 15 years, while accumulating gold for 17 consecutive months. The Shanghai Gold Exchange already providing a dollar-free settlement path for the world's largest energy consumer. Rare earth leverage held by China covering 75% of U.S. import requirements. Treasury yields pressing against levels that constrain economic growth. Every single one of those variables pointing in the same direction. Not because of speculation, because of structural logic that has been compounding since 2008 and is now reaching its visible surface. The question is not whether you should hold physical silver. The structural case for that answer has never been clearer. The question is whether you fully understand why you're holding it. Because understanding is what protects you on days like today. Understanding is what stops you from selling the position that is about to matter most at exactly the moment fear is loudest. The people who will look back at April 2026 as the moment everything became obvious are the people who were paying attention right now, in this moment, before the broader market caught up to what the most sophisticated capital in the world is already doing. This is Recession Warnings. The Strait is the battleground. The dollar is what is actually at stake. And physical silver is how you hold your ground when the system resets. If this breakdown gave you clarity, hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. There is more coming this week, and you will want to be here for it.